Well, hello, I am Christy Lucas, CEO of Roots for Boots, and I am signing on here at Community Media for another episode of Open House as your guest host today. And I have with me a very special veteran, Jack Kranchick, Vietnam veteran, and we're going to be talking about the upcoming Memorial Day holiday. And he's going to try to help us make our Memorial Day just a little bit more memorable. But we're going to start first with your story, a little bit about your story, Jack. Okay, so you graduated high school in 1965.
Correct.
Okay. You joined the Army on your 19th birthday.
Yes.
So you decided to go in.
Yes.
Okay.
We went in on a buddy system. Two of the people had already joined, and they said, we're going in. I said, when it is? They said, September 12th. I said, all right. I went to the recruiter, and he pulled some strings and got me in on September 12th, 1966.
All right, so that's when it all began, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you arrived in Vietnam in 1967.
That's correct.
Okay, and you were on the ground just
Yes.
about all the time, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you were a part of two battles, the Battle of Dak To and the Tet Offensive.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences in those battles?
Although I wasn't, and people who are in the audience will understand, I wasn't a full-time 11B or infantry. I was assigned to an infantry battalion. At the time of the beginning of the Dak To battle, I happened to be in a C-130 getting some supplies for our company, and a 122 rocket went right through the tail of it,
Oh my goodness.
but it didn't go off because the skin was too thin on the airplane, and it didn't go off until it hit the runway.
Oh my goodness.
And we managed to run off of there, get into our bunker that had been dug on the side of the runway, and shrapnel went flying by me, bombs went flying by me, but I managed to stay alive in this little bunker there. And I never was on Hill 875 where the 173rd had 300 and some killed.
Now is this Dak To that you're referring
Yes,
to?
yes.
Okay.
Hill 875, it would be like a suburb of Dak To.
Okay.
It was the Dak To region. I don't remember the county that it's in.
Okay. Wow. So when you're in the midst of all that going off around you, like what is going through your head?
Staying alive was one of the first things I kept thinking of, but then you realize that you have no control over it. I mean, realistically, and you might have heard this before from other guests, you kind of give up your life. You don't know whether you're going to live. I don't want to be over dramatic, but a lot of us used to just shrug our shoulders and went to do the next thing. There was no question. I mean, you had to do the job, and if one of us got killed, one of us got killed. So you felt better because you didn't know if you were going to make it out, but you were prepared for the end.
Wow. That's incredible. So what about the Tet? Do you have anything to
The
and that was a
Tet
surprise attack by the enemy,
The
correct?
Tet Offensive, I was in Tuiwa, which was actually near a beach. And we got hit pretty hard. There was a place called Cemetery Hill. And there was a lot of bullets flying, mortars coming in, everything's happening. But nobody paid any attention because to us it was just another day at the job.
Another day at the office.
Another day at the office. We were always getting hit. We were always getting attacked. So we just never really thought much about it until we got the Stars and Stripes newspaper. And what that did was it told us that it was planned and all the county's seats were hit. And if it would have been for that, we would have just thought it was another night.
Wow. Okay. So what was the jungle like? What was it?
The jungle was very hot, very moist. Like everybody else would tell you, there was wait-a-minute vines, and as you were walking through them, the vines would wrap around your feet, and you had to stop and cut them off. You had to watch out. The main thing over there was booby traps, because you had to go through the jungle. If you went on the path, they would be set with booby traps. Somebody would trip a flare or trip the wire and kill the people behind them, or kill him. So we stayed in the jungle most of the time, and we had, overhead, there were big trees. It was really hot and humid there, animals making noise, so you couldn't always hear what was going on. But it was a trip.
Oh my gosh. I can't imagine, like you say, it's another day at the office, but not only did you have to worry about being shot or blown up, stepping on a booby trap, you had to deal with the climate itself there.
The climate, the leeches, the snakes, the lizards that were around. One time I walked into a giant red ant, the red ant.
And when you say giant red ant, what
It
do
was,
you...
well, it wasn't the giant red ant, it was a giant ball made of red ants.
Oh, okay.
And when I walked into it, I had the machine gun, and I'm walking along, and kabam, these red ants are crawling all over me, and I had to undress to get all these ants off of me. And that's another thing you just wouldn't have thought of. You know, you're looking ahead, not at 6'5" level, and wham.
There it is.
There it was, all
What
over
were
me.
the leeches like?
They're very, you didn't feel them biting you. You would just look down and they'd be crawling up there. And so some of us had salt and we'd get salt and put salt on. That's what got rid of them, where you'd light a match and burn them off.
So you do understand, to the normal civilian like me, this all sounds like, how did you ever come out alive? But you talk about it like you're like it's just, you know, it was what it was.
60 years later, you're correct.
Yeah.
It sounds like it every day, but really, that's how we thought about it. I don't recall anybody really going crazy over things. It was just, this is your job, this is where we're walking to, this is where we're setting up, let's go. It was, and that was one of the things about being, which we hadn't covered yet. I was in the 173rd Airborne, which is all volunteers.
Okay.
So I was in a different group. We were all volunteers. So it wasn't anybody who was going to sit down and create a disturbance. Somebody didn't want to go where we're supposed to. We just followed the rules.
Yep. I stayed focused on the task at hand.
Stayed focused on the task at hand.
So how'd you stay dry? And how'd you keep your
You
weapons
didn't.
dry? Well, yes, and talk about your weapons. I mean, would they work in the jungle like that?
Oh, yes. Now, if you got them into, say, the beach, the people who are down in Tuiwan, places along the beach, Quignon, you get sand in there, there might be a misfire. You could have a problem with the way it works. But generally speaking, water didn't affect anything. We walked through rivers, we walked through creeks, we walked in monsoon weather, and the weapons always fired.
What'd you eat?
Sea rations. I am one of the greatest. They used to call me the connoisseur of food.
Yeah?
I could eat anything. But generally speaking, I ate 3 or 4 meals over there. Chicken bone, chicken loaf, and turkey loaf. And there was 12 of them. And you got your pick, and you knew where they were in the box. So what they would do is when they figured out everybody was going for the good stuff, they would spin it around to try to trick us.
Oh my gosh.
It didn't work. We knew right where the chicken bone and turkey loaf were, so I was right there in the front. And occasionally we had guys, their wives and mothers would send them vinegar or hot Tabasco sauce and stuff like that.
So did you get care packages when you were out there?
Yes, yes. Very few, because you couldn't carry them.
Right.
I mean, if you're in the rear area, I was in the rear area quite a bit, and you could get chips and pretzels from right down the road here, Charles Chips or whatever they were, Utz's.
Right.
But you couldn't take them out in the woods with you, so
Right.
you just try to eat what you could while you were there.
All right. Did you know anybody that was captured by the enemy?
No.
No?
I understand that the 173rd has like 12 POWs, but they're presumed dead.
Mm-hmm.
They just never found their bodies because of the 500-pound bombs hitting where they were.
Yeah.
And so they never found them. We still have teams going over there. Wambi Cook, our president, goes over there every couple of years, and they dig in where they got the last report of a guy, but they haven't found any.
That's sad.
Yes.
That's sad. So what was your mindset during that time? Like for me, to be out there and have to deal with the job that you had to take on, I don't know that I could get up every morning and do that. So what was your mindset that kept you going?
You didn't get up every morning because you didn't get to sleep much at night.
Yeah.
What you did was you had a 3-man bunker. And on this 3-man bunker, one guy was awake for say 10 to 2 at night. The other 2 guys would get 4 hours sleep, then the next, or 2 hours sleep, then
So on
somebody
top of
else.
everything else, you just didn't sleep.
You didn't sleep. Everybody was always run down, always tired. I mean, you were just always either on guard duty, watching on your own in case the guy fell asleep, or you're out on a patrol somewhere, or you had your own, I forgot exactly what we used to call them, but you went out way in front of the post, and you were supposed to be the first ones who got the fire going on and then run back to save everybody in the back. Listening post is what they were called, listening post. And you went out with a radio or a telephone and 100 yards of wire, and you sat out front there, and if you heard anybody coming up close, you turned the handle so they would hear that we're being attacked.
Wow.
But that meant you might not make it back, but they had to have listening posts.
Right. So again, on top of everything else, you lost sleep, you didn't get hardly any sleep, and you still had to perform your job.
You still had to perform your job, which is why a lot of these operations only lasted, say, 10 days to 2 weeks. And then you came in and just totally crashed as long as you could. Unfortunately for me, I was in the 4th Battalion of the 173rd Airborne. And we were known as a reaction force for the whole area. And anytime there was a fight or somebody getting overrun, they called us. So we were always on alert. So on top of everything else, we were always on alert to go to the next firefight.
Right. And we would call that always being on call.
Always on
Always
call.
being on call. So how was your morale boosted? Were there certain things that happened? Like I know care packages probably boosted your morale, but was there anything
Well, I
else?
used to get a letter every 3 or 4 months. I got the proverbial Dear John letter very early in the beginning.
Oh, no.
Well, she thought it was a Dear John letter. When I went over it, I never had any more thoughts about it. But
Yeah.
letters,
Well,
letters
that's got to
were
be
a big,
hard. That's got to be hard. Yeah.
letters were a big thing over there. Everybody was always looking for mail call or something like that. And maybe to get a newspaper or somebody telling you what was going on. But generally speaking, it was all inclusive. Where we were, who we were with, that's all we worried about.
So you waited for a mail call. Yeah. And that's kind of an art that's lost,
Yes.
letter writing.
Well,
Yeah.
nowadays you could get a text, but it's pretty hard if you're leading a patrol and you get a text, hey, honey, we're having trouble with something, can you please answer this text right now? And this is much easier.
You've got other things you're dealing with.
Yeah, you didn't have that in those days.
Yeah, and I know we talked earlier, but one of the questions that just piques my interest is how did you know when a battle was over? Like Dak To or the Tet Offensive, how did you know it was over?
It was real easy. They left. When they left, the battle was over. As long as the enemy was still there, we carried on.
Carry on.
So it was always like that. Wherever you were, when they retreated, because what would happen is we'd get in a firefight, and I wasn't in many, but we were in a firefight. We'd call in Martin and his helicopters, and they would rake the place. And then as you realized the enemy was getting further away, you called in the big bombers and the Air Force to drop even more.
Push them back further.
Push them back further,
Right.
and then we were on stand down.
Right. It had to be hard from the ground, though, because the helicopter had the advantage of being in the air and seeing more. So you guys down on the ground.
The important part to them was we would look around at each other, then I'd look at you and go, but they're going home. We're not. We're still.
You're still in the jungle.
We're still in the jungle with the monsoon and the rats and the bugs and everything else, and they're going back to their nice little base. And the same with the Air Force pilots. They were going to Okinawa or Laos or somewhere, and we're like, but we're still here.
You had a tough job for sure. How long were you in?
I was in the Army for 31 months, and I was 22 months in Vietnam.
And talk about that, because you signed up for more time there, right?
Yes, the Army came up with what's called the 5-month early out. When you had less than 5 months allowed in the Army, they wanted you out because it wasn't worth the paperwork to do it. So I stayed for 6 months extra. After 6 months, I only had 89 more days to go to get out of the Army, so I signed up for 89 more days.
And then what happened?
Then I got wounded twice in 89 more days, thinking
Yes.
how cool I was, dodging bullets and staying away from everything for 18
So you
months.
were almost there, and then you got shot not once, but twice.
Yes,
So you had 2 Purple Hearts.
yes.
Yeah. Do you have any regrets about that?
Not one iota. Everything that happened to me, everything. My beginning life wasn't too good, but everything ever happened to me was being in the 173rd, learning how operations and how people interact. I was able to get into the Pennsylvania State Police, and I always felt great thanks to what I learned over there.
Learn there.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, it was great.
Yeah, so they were skills that you carried over when you came back.
When we had, I don't know how many officers, nobody ever counted them, probably 800 officers, probably 600 West Point graduates. And when you have that kind of people around you all the time, and our big generals were all World War II veterans and Korean veterans, so you learned so much Like in 1965, I graduated from high school. In 1969, I raised 2 Purple Hearts and had been around all these people who really knew what was going on.
You had to grow up fast.
Grew up fast.
Yes.
They did
But look at you now.
they did a good job for me.
So now, what was it like when you came home, when you returned home?
This has to be the weirdest story you're ever going to hear behind this table. But all we heard about was people getting spit on, people having stuff thrown at them at the airports, the hippies, driving everybody nuts. They took their uniforms off. My mother lived in a place called Cocoa Beach, Florida.
Okay.
And she worked as a cocktail waitress there. I can't remember the name of the place. Anyway, it was the Carnival Club. She brought me in. They put me on the stage and gave me a standing ovation. Everybody clapped. Bought me too many drinks, but I got a hero's welcome. Everybody else was complaining, and I was in front of 500 people standing, and they sang patriotic songs for me.
You were one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, I was one of those. That's what I said. People complained
Well,
about
as it should be.
Yeah,
As it should have been for all our Vietnam veterans.
It was amazing.
So that's wonderful. I'm actually glad to hear that.
It was
for you.
amazing how it could happen.
Yeah. Any other details of your story that you want to share?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything except, like I said, I grew up mainly on Army bases.
Okay.
And after a while, I got tired of that. I mean, it was nothing to just be sitting in school. By the way, we have a new student. Tom left, and Fred's moving in now. And
So was your father military?
Yeah, he was
Okay.
military. And so I got tired of that and wanted a more stable environment. So I
Roots.
moved up to the coal region and lived with my grandparents. And from there, things got better.
Good, good. And again, look at you now.
Yeah, we're trying.
Okay, so let's switch channels a little bit. We're going to talk about Memorial Day, and I'm always one that wants to try to make Memorial Day a little bit more memorable because it's kind of a double-edged sword with Memorial Day because you want to celebrate, but you also want to honor those that paid the ultimate sacrifice. So what does Memorial Day mean to you?
I've never looked it up in a dictionary, but I'm pretty much sure that it means in memory of. So something about that is when I go to Memorial Day, and I go to a lot of parades, and I've been in quite a few, I think of the 1,700 plus guys from the 173rd who were killed. I mean, and the other 10,200 some that have Purple Hearts, and I think of the people the sacrifices that were made out there. And it makes it real easy to put my hand over my heart or to salute the flag, because that's who I think about quite a bit. I also think of my father. He was in World War II, Korea and Vietnam. My uncles and stuff like that, they were all there also, so I think of them at the same time.
It's a lot to think about,
Yes.
especially when it's in your family.
And I
you've
make it a
experienced
point
it.
too. I mean, I literally make it a point to look at the flag on Memorial Day, think about it.
Good. So can you share any stories of how you honor Memorial Day?
Well, one of the thing was like 1969. I mean, I was not a big veteran, you know, I'm a Vietnam vet and all that, but it still hadn't hit me yet. Because 5 years earlier, I was a student in high school, and now all of a sudden I got a Purple Heart with 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star, and I'm marching in parades, and people are looking at me, he's a veteran. And I'm like, wow, all that time I stood on those sidewalks looking at those people, and now I'm one
Now
of them.
you're one of them.
And now it's one of them. It was absolutely mind-blowing that now I'm a veteran.
Yes.
And the people who had gone before us, because you remember now, I was with the World War II people. Now, I graduated from high school in 1965. 47 years earlier was World War I. So to us, that was so far in the background. Now here this is 60 years after Vietnam. So people they're thinking of me as old as we thought of the World War I veterans. I mean, when I was a little boy, there were still Civil War veterans still alive. He didn't die.
It's really not that far ago, you know, not that long ago.
1950s, they lost the last Civil War.
Yeah.
I was like 12 years old.
So when you were in Vietnam, I know that you saw people that you served with, I'm sure, die
Yes.
out there. So how do you get past that grief? Like, what's helped you get past that grief? Because that's what...
Time heals all wounds. I mean, I can remember a captain that we had. We thought he was the coolest guy in the world. He was 25 and we were only 20. And he was going to Hawaii to get married. So as he was getting on the helicopter, he went like this to his friends, got shot and killed. And that sticks with me all the time. I didn't see it happen, but of course, it was one of the biggest talks around us. But 2 other times, I was supposed to go on an operation, and I got sent somewhere else, and both guys who went got killed. So I think of them all the time. But time healing all the wounds now. I remember incidents, and I remember some names, but the faces have started really slipping away. They're fading now.
So is there a specific Memorial Day that stands out for you?
The 1969 parade was the one that stuck out for me the most, because that's when I realized I was not a spectator anymore, but I'd actually joined the ranks of being a veteran and was welcomed as a veteran. That was the important part.
And that was 69?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, right after I came home in April 69, in May, I'm marching in a parade, and it was just so unreal because 4 years earlier in the same town, I was a high school student, and now I'm marching as a combat wounded veteran. I'm like,
Heroes welcome.
how did this happen to me?
It's almost surreal.
Yeah, it was. It was actually surreal.
Yeah. Have you seen Memorial Day change over the years? Because with me, I was born in '66. So I came in, and I was young during the end of Vietnam. I don't really remember too much. I remember seeing some things on the television, but I pretty much grew up during a time of peace. So Memorial Day was just a picnic to me at Grandma's house. But as we started getting into more and more wars as I grew up, it became a lot more meaningful to me, to the point where I created Roots for Boots. That's where that all came to fruition. So have you seen it change over the years?
Intensely. I helped run the parades in Carlisle. Now, Carlisle has Army War College there. They have Dickinson College. They have a lot of different stuff.
There.
And when I first started helping with the parades up there, they were 4 or 5 deep on the sidewalks. And when you went up to the town square where they had the speech, it was packed. Nowadays, 1 deep, people sitting on the sidewalk. And I think the reason is there's just not many veterans alive. And it's not the veterans alive. 16% of the World War II veterans, or 16% of the people were in the war during World War II. Vietnam had 4%. The global war on terror is like 0.005.
Yeah.
So nowadays, people don't even know who a veteran is that are their age. There's just not enough of them because they don't manifest themselves like they did in the. I always looked up to the World War II and Korean veterans because they were my peers almost. Right. But nowadays, there's nobody around.
We got to work to change that.
Yeah,
we do.
We're doing it.
And you know, with Roots for Boots, our core values are serve, educate, and inspire. So that educate piece. We try to go into the schools to educate about patriotism and things like that, because that, I think we need to work on growing that.
More than ever.
The community that we serve, the York Adams area, is very patriotic. I don't think they really have that problem there, because their parades, I know, are very well attended. So there is hope. There is hope.
Well, they don't have, nowadays, the new generation doesn't have the people to see every day on the street that are veterans.
Right.
Anywhere near their age.
Right.
So who wants to look at me or older generation people? You read about them, but to see them on the streets and be able to talk to them, it's really not that many.
And that's a skill that's becoming lost.
Yes.
Just talking, like letter writing, you know. All right, so what duties or obligations does society have toward those who have died for the nation? What do you think?
Yes, from the beginning, 1.4 million people have been killed in world wars. Okay. So if you count all the way back to the Revolutionary and everything else, 1.4 million. They've done a good job of keeping those people pretty satisfied with the VA. The Veterans Administration does a great job. Now, you'll hear pockets of one town or one city isn't having good stuff, but by and large, you get anything you need at the VA. So I have never had a complaint with them. And I think we get enough publicity, and I think enough people know about us. Most people just don't want to care or don't want to be involved with us. And that's just, you know.
Well, again, we need to work on changing that.
One of the things I brought up years ago, we had, at the peak, 569,000 people in Vietnam. there were probably 600,000 big people at the Big Ten watching a football game that Saturday. Now, if you take the Western conferences, the Southeast Conference, the ACC, how many people were watching football on a Saturday when we were at our peak over there? So it's so much easier to go with those 4 million people who are in football games than a tiny minority who are in Vietnam.
Thank God for that tiny minority.
Yes, yes.
Thank God for that tiny
The
minority.
dominoes, remember, it was before your time, but the reason they started Vietnam was the domino theory. If Vietnam fell, then Laos would fall. If Laos
Right.
fell, Cambodia would fall, et cetera, et cetera. We stopped the dominoes.
Right.
Didn't get any credit for it, but we stopped the dominoes.
We did. So how do people share their gratitude for the sacrifice of the fallen, especially on Memorial Day? with regards to
I
Memorial
think
Day?
they do it just by showing up at parades and just, being seen, clapping for each unit that goes by. I'm very satisfied. I think in the old days, we probably got 50% of the people who really cared about it. We probably still get 50% of the people who care about it. It's just the numbers have dropped off because it's not as one-on-one as it
Right.
used to be. I mean, you used to have 2.8 million people served in Vietnam with boots on the ground.
Right.
So it was easy to find a Vietnam veteran. Nowadays, try to find a global war on terror veteran. I mean, you have to knock on doors to find somebody.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so
That's
the
a good point.
people who know the GWAT people, they'll show up.
Right.
But there's not a lot of them because there never was too many of them.
Right.
That's my opinion.
Right. Okay. So is there anything specific that you want us as civilians to know about how we can make Memorial Day more memorable this year, or any year, the years to come?
Well, I would just say Memorial Day is for people who have died, okay? And now you got to try to think back, say, into Gettysburg, since we're in the
Since we're here,
Gettysburg
yeah.
area. And you're standing there, and the bravery that it took to just stand there
Yep.
with your musket and the people coming across that line, and they go down, and the next person's move up. I mean, the nerve that it took to do that. And then look at Korea, the Chosin Reservoir, where people were freezing to death. They had more people freeze to death than were shot. And then you took the Incheon landings. They came down and find you, and you got to go in Incheon. Or take World War II. Look at, we're going to hit Omaha Beach, or we're going to hit Utah Beach. That takes a lot of guts. I mean, when it's nice to sit back here and go, well, that was pretty tough on Omaha Beach, but when you're in the first landing craft and they're just firing, or World War I, where 100 yards was a victory. If you beat the enemy back 100 yards, that was a big victory. And for that, you had to run through the bombs, the barbed wire, you had bombs coming over the top of you, and unrelenting machine guns firing at you. Now, where do you get the guts to come over the top of the trench and charge into that?
That's a lot to think about.
That's
right
a lot
there.
to think about.
That's a
So
lot to
if you're
handle.
ever wondering why you honor the dead, it's because they showed up for that,
For the freedom that we enjoy.
for that freedom we enjoy.
Exactly. Exactly. So is there an overall meaning of Memorial Day to you? And why do you love America so much that you did all this, that you put your life on the line?
Well, we just started off in our vernacular. It's called Army brat. I was an
Yep,
Army brat.
yep.
And one of the first places we ever was Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and then we went to Japan. And I can distinctly remember retreat playing at 5 o'clock. Everybody stopped their cars on the post. Everybody stood out and saluted the flag. Us kids came out, put our hands over our head. As soon as they got done playing retreat, back in the car you went. And when you grow up with that kind of a mental thing, that you're honoring all these people who have died, all the people who are serving. I've been like that since Boy Scouts, or excuse me, Cub Scouts, and standing out there for retreat. And it's always just been a part of my life.
You bring up a good point, too. You grew up with it.
Yes.
Because that's how our family was. We were always very patriotic, and I grew up with it. That, you thank a veteran for his or her service, and,
Right.
and there's respect there. So I think that's a key point in growing up and modeling that behavior for our young people.
Well, I'm glad to
Especially-
hear that, because more than likely, I've run across quite a few of them. I used to coach up here at Carlisle. there's the rebellious side of it too. Their fathers were colonels and sergeants and whatever, and they rebelled and just didn't want anything to do with any of that stuff.
Yeah. Again, there's hope though. There's hope out there because there's enough of them out there that are very grateful. So with Roots for Boots, I always tell veterans to tell their stories because a lot of veterans don't want to talk about their stories. And just sitting here with you for this short period of time, I've learned so much more about Vietnam, about the Tet Offensive. I never even had heard of the Doc To, so that was new to me. So I want to thank you so much for your service, and I want to thank you for coming in here and telling your story and giving us something to think about for Memorial Day, hopefully the Memorial Days to come, because I know that you've done that for me. And as we wrap up this episode of Open House, I encourage all of the veterans out there to tell your stories to your families. And if you can't tell them, at least write them down so that they know the things that they were faced. I mean, it was almost like you were up against, you know, I can't imagine how you got up every morning to go to what you call work or to go to the office. So with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of Open House. I'm Christy Lucas from Roots for Boots, signing off.